guys, I'm back to read chapter 3 from our Read Aloud, The Wishing Spell. Max, I can hear him upstairs playing, so I thought this would be a great time to go ahead and get the reading done so he won't be making any cameos, but we'll see, fingers crossed. So I hope everybody's doing well, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This one's called A Birthday Surprise. So if you remember last time I read to you, it was kind of sad. We learned that the twins' father had passed away the previous year, and now their mom has to work on their birthday. So let's see if things get happier, okay? Chapter 3, A Birthday Surprise. Pencils down, Miss Peters ordered from the front of the classroom. Her students were taking a math test, and she had been watching them like a prison guard the entire time. Figurative language again, right? This book is great on vocabulary and figurative language. She said she had been watching them like a prison guard. What type of figurative language is that? 1, 2, 3. It's a simile, isn't it? Comparing her to a prison guard using like her as. Pass your test to the front. Connor looked down at the test as if it were written in ancient hieroglyphics. Most of his answers were blank, and he had just scribbled around the others to make it look like he'd tried. He said a little prayer to himself and passed the test forward with the others. Uh-oh. Guess who's in the kitchen? It's Max. He must have come for story time too, so hopefully he stays down there. The tests were all passed to Alex, who stacked them in neat piles for Mrs. Peters. She always felt so refreshed after taking a test, especially one as simple as that one had been for her. Twins are so opposite, aren't they? She thinks the test was so easy, and remember how Connor described it? Her brother's test caught her eye, since it was the one with the least amount of writing on it. Alex knew Connor had tried his best at school, but his best never seemed to be good enough. She looked back at him, wishing she could help him, and then it occurred to her, maybe she could. What do you think Alex is going to do to help Connor right now? Let's make some predictions. What do you think she's going to do to help? Alex looked up at Miss Peters and saw she was busy looking at the notes in her lesson plans. Would her teacher notice if Alex quickly filled in a couple of answers for her brother? Was Alex even capable of doing something so blatantly wrong? What do you think? Is she going to do that? Would that be wrong? It would be, wouldn't it? That's not ethical. Was it considered cheating if you were doing someone else's test? Would it be gracious? Would the gracious gesture cancel out the offense in the grand scheme of things? Alex was prone to overthinking everything, so she just did it. She quickly filled in some of her brother's answers, making her handwriting slightly sloppier than it usually was, and handed the stack of tests to Miss Peters. It was the most spontaneous thing she had ever done. "Thank you, Miss Bailey," Miss Peters said, making eye contact with her. Alex felt like the pit of her stomach had fallen out of her body. Have you ever felt like that before? Like where you just feel like ugh in your stomach because you know you did something bad? I have. The excitement she had felt from her impulse was now overshadowed by guilt. Do you think that you would feel guilty if you cheated and you knew it was wrong? Even if it was for a good cause? I think I would feel guilty too. Or scared that I was going to get busted, right? I don't think I want to get busted by Miss Peters. Miss Peters had always trusted her. How could she do something so juvenile? Should she confess what she had done? What would the punishment be for her crime? Would she feel this guilty for the rest of her life? She looked back at her brother. Connor let out a long but quiet sigh, and Alex sensed her brother's sadness and embarrassment. She could feel his hopelessness as if it were her own. You ever heard of a thing called twin tuition? Like where you feel what your twin is feeling? I know. Sometimes I feel like Paige and I have that, and sometimes we just don't. But sometimes I think that's just like having empathy for somebody else. I don't know if it's twin tuition, but maybe. The critical wheels in Alex's head stopped turning. She knew she'd done the right thing, not as a student, but as a sister. "I want you all to get out your homework from last night," Miss Peters commanded, "and I would like you to briefly present your work in front of the class." The teacher regularly surprised the class with impromptu presentations to keep them on their toes. She took a seat on the stool in the back of the room, uncomfortably close to Connor's seat so she could keep an eye on his consciousness. One by one, the students presented their assignments to the class. Besides a boy who thought Jack and the Beanstalk was about an alien abduction, and a girl who claimed Puss in Boots was an early example of animal cruelty, all of the students seemed to have interpreted the tales correctly. It was so hard to choose just one fairy tale to write about, Alex said as she animatedly presented her 7-page paper to the class. So, I selected a story, the theme of which is present in virtually every fairy tale and every story ever written: Cinderella. Her excitement was not shared by her peers. Many people have had issues with Cinderella, saying it has anti-feminist elements, Alex continued. But I think that's completely ridiculous. Cinderella's not about a man saving a woman. It's about karma. You guys ever heard the word karma? What you give, and what you get, yeah. Like if you do bad things come to you. If you do good things come to you. I could see that in Cinderella, could you? Think about the ending, what happened to Cinderella versus her stepfamily. Most of the class began daydreaming about other things. Miss Peters was the only person in the room who seemed to be even slightly interested in what Alex had to say. Think about it, Alex went on. Even years after constant abuse from her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella remained a good person with high hopes. She never stopped believing in herself and in the good of the world. And although she married the prince in the end, Cinderella always had inner happiness. Her story shows that even in the worst situations, even when it seems no one in the world appreciates you, as long as you have hope, everything can get better. I kind of like that. Alex let her mind linger on what she had said. She questioned the last points she had made in her presentation. Was that really what Cinderella was about, or was it what she needed Cinderella to be about? Thank you, Miss Bailey. Very well said, Miss Peters said with the closest thing to a smile on her face that she was capable of making. Thank you for your time, Alex said, and nodded to the class. It's your turn, Mr. Bailey, the teacher announced. She was sitting so close to him that he could feel the warmth of her breath from her nostrils on the back of his neck. Have you ever had a teacher that reminds you of Miss Peters? I hope not. I don't get the most positive vibes, do you? She doesn't seem very warm and loving like a lot of teachers that I know are. She seems almost like to torture the children. Connor went to the front of the classroom, dragging his feet as if they were encased in concrete. Ooh, can you picture that? Let's read that sentence again. Connor went to the front of the classroom, dragging his feet as if they were encased in concrete. Can you picture his feet in like concrete blocks and like dragging them to the front of the room? So how do you think if that's how if he's thinking of like his feet felt, how do you think he's feeling? Do you think he's looking forward to this presentation, or do you think he's what? Yeah, it kind of sounds like he's dreading it, doesn't it? He had never had any trouble talking in front of the class before, but he'd rather be anywhere in the world than presenting something in front of a teacher. Alex gave him an encouraging nod. I chose The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Connor said, going against his sister's advice the day before. Alex slumped in her seat, and Miss Peters rolled her eyes. This was very disappointing. The teacher just rolled her eyes at him. Ooh, think about some character traits of Miss Peters. I keep hoping she's going to redeem herself and like have some good teacher qualities, and she continues to disappoint me. So what's your character trait of Miss Peters? Give me a word. Mean? Yeah. Unloving? Yeah. Kind of strict and rude? Yeah. Where were we? She rolled her eyes, I remember. I know what you're all thinking. I went with the easiest one, Connor said. Except, reading it again, I don't think the story is about the importance of honesty. I think it's about high expectations. Alex and Mrs. Peters both raised their eyebrows. Where was he going with this? Sure, the boy was a brat. I can't deny that, Connor continued, gesturing to the half-page paper he'd written. But can you blame him for having a little fun? Clearly his village was having a bit of a wolf problem, and everyone was stressed out about it. He was just a kid. Did I really expect him to be perfect all the time? His presentation may have not been the best, but it certainly was catching the class's attention. And it makes me wonder, why was no one watching this kid? Connor added. Maybe if his parents had kept an eye on him, he wouldn't have been eaten. I think the story is trying to tell us to keep an eye on our kids, especially if they're pathological liars. Thank you. Connor never tried to be funny. He was just painfully honest about his thoughts and opinions. This honesty always amused his classmates, but never his teacher. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, Miss Peters said sharply. You may sit down. Connor knew he'd blown it. He took a seat, resuming his position under his teacher's cold stare and warm breath. Why did he even bother trying anymore? It wasn't the end of a school day unless Connor felt completely worthless. There was only one person who was capable of making him feel better when he felt like this. Connor only wishes he were still around. So who do you think is the person that was capable of making him feel better? His dad, right? That's sad. Can you imagine going home every day and just feeling worthless? Because I think probably how his teacher's treating him. I hope none of you ever felt like that. So we've come to an apple. Remember what that means? It means a new setting, right? Mr. Bailey always knew when his son needed to talk to him. It didn't have anything to do with observations or intuition, but with location. Occasionally, Mr. Bailey would get home from work and find his son sitting up in the oak tree in the front yard with a contemplative look on his face. Connor? Mr. Bailey would ask, approaching the tree. Is everything okay, bud? Uh-huh, Connor would mumble. Are you sure? Mr. Bailey would ask. Yep, Connor would say unconvincingly. He wasn't as vocal about his troubles as his sister was, but you could see it on his face. And Mr. Bailey would climb up to the tree and have a seat on the branch next to his son and coax out what was troubling with him. Do you have a positive connotation of Mr. Bailey or a negative one? I think I get really positive vibes about him. He seemed like a really good dad. Are you sure you don't want to talk about it? Mr. Bailey would continue. Did something happen at school today? Connor would nod his head. I got a bad grade on a test, he admitted on one occasion. Did you study for it? His father asked. Yes, Connor said. I studied really hard, Dad, but it's just no use. I'll never be as smart as Alex. His cheeks turned bright with embarrassment. Are you feeling some empathy for Connor? I am. Breaks my heart. I just want him to be my student so I can help him. Do you guys want him to be your classmate so you could help him too? I think we can make him feel positive, couldn't we? Make school better for him. I think so. Connor, let me fill you in on something that took me a long time to learn, Mr. Bailey said. The women in your life are always going to seem smarter. It's just the way it is. I've been married to your mother for 13 years, and I still have trouble keeping up with her. You can't compare yourself to others. But I'm stupid, Dad, Connor said, his eyes filling with tears. Did your heart just break a little? I find that hard to believe, Mr. Bailey said. It takes intelligence to be funny and to tell a good joke, and you're the funniest kid I know. Humor doesn't help with history or math, Connor said. It doesn't matter how hard I try in school. I'm always going to be the dumb kid in class. Connor's face went white and expressionless. He stared off into nothing, so ashamed of himself that it hurt. Luckily for him, Mr. Bailey had an encouraging story for every situation. Connor, have I ever told you the legend about the walking fish? Mr. Bailey asked him. He looked up at his father. The walking fish? Connor asked. Dad, no offense, but I don't think one of your stories is going to make me feel better this time. All right, suit yourself, Mr. Bailey said. A few minutes passed, and Connor's curiosity got the best of him. Okay, you can tell me the walking fish story, Dad, Connor said. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up as they always did just before he was about to tell a story. Connor could tell this was going to be a good one. Once upon a time, there was a large fish who lived in a lake by himself, Mr. Bailey told him. Every day the fish would watch longingly as the boy from the village nearby would play with the horses and the dogs and the squirrels in the land. Is the dog going to die in the story, Dad? I hate stories like that, don't you? It makes me so sad. Connor interrupted. You know I hate stories when dogs die. Let me finish, Mr. Bailey went on. One day a fairy came to the lake and granted the fish a wish. That's random, Connor said. Why do fairies always just show up and do nice things for people they don't know? Employment obligation? Mr. Bailey shrugged. But for argument's sake, let's say she dropped her wand in the lake and the fish retrieved it. So she offered him a wish as a thank you. Happy now? That's better, Connor said. Go on. The fish predictably wished for legs so he could play with the boy from the village. Mr. Bailey said. So the fairy turned the fins into legs and he became a walking fish. That's weird, Connor said. Let me guess. The fish was so freaky looking that the boy never wanted to play with him? Nope. They became great friends and played together with the other land animals, Mr. Bailey told him. But one day, the boy fell into the lake and he couldn't swim. The walking fish tried to save him, but it was no use. He didn't have fins anymore. Sadly, the boy drowned. Connor's mouth hung open like a broken glove compartment. Can you picture that, the glove compartment door just falling open like that? That's good figurative language. You know which type it is? It used like or as, so it's 1, 2, 3. It's a simile, isn't it? Comparing his mouth to the broken glove compartment. You see, if the fish had just stayed in the lake and not wished to be something else, he could have saved the boy's life, Mr. Bailey finished. Dad, that's a horrible story, he said. How does the boy live by a lake and not know how to swim? Dogs can swim. Couldn't one of them have saved him? Where was that fairy when the boy was drowning? You're missing the point of the story, Mr. Bailey said. Sometimes we forget about our own advantages because we focus on what we don't have. Just because you have to work a little harder at something that seems easier for others doesn't mean you're without your own talents. Connor thought about this for a moment. I think I get it, Dad, he said. Mr. Bailey smiled at him. Now, why don't we get down from this tree and I'll help you study for your next test? I told you, studying doesn't help. I've tried and tried and tried. It never helps. Then we'll come up with our own way of studying, Mr. Bailey told him. We'll look at pictures of people in your history books and we'll make up jokes about them so you'll remember their names. And we'll create funny scenarios to help you with all of those math formulas. Connor slowly but surely nodded in agreement. Fine, he said with a half smile. But for future reference, I liked your story about the curvy tree much better. We've come to an apple. So we're going to change our 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we're going to change our setting now. Good. The walk home that day was very quiet. Can you tell they keep inserting flashbacks into here? Yeah. Keep doing flashbacks, don't they? Keep going back and thinking about past times with their dads. With their dad. Sorry, singular. They had one. Alex could sense her brother's presentation had left him a little tense. She tried breaking the silence every few steps with supportive comments. Or at least she thought they were supportive. I thought you made a good point, she said sweetly. Granted, it's not the point I would have ever made. Thanks, Connor replied. She wasn't helping. You may have overanalyzed it, though, Alex said. I do it all the time. Sometimes I read a story and interpret it the way I want to, rather than the way the author wanted me to. It just takes practice. He didn't respond. She wasn't helping. Well, it's our birthday today, Alex reminded him. Are you excited to be 12? Not really, Connor admitted. It just feels like 11. But aren't we supposed to be getting like a new set of molars soon? Come on, let's be positive, Alex insisted. Even though we aren't doing anything exciting for our birthdays, we should still stay optimistic. There are plenty of things to look forward to. 1 more year until we're teenagers. I suppose, Connor said. Only 4 more years until we can drive. And 6 until we can vote and go to college, Alex added. That was all they could come up with. Their cheerfulness was hollow and they both knew it. And so they stayed silent for the remainder of the walk. Even if they had the most extravagant party in the world waiting for them at home, birthdays were always going to be hard for them. School had been predictable. The walk home had been typical. The whole day just seemed normal. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary to make their birthday feel special at all. Until they got home and saw the bright blue car pull into their driveway. Grandma, the twins said in perfect unison. Surprise! Yelled their grandmother, getting out of her car. She was so loud, the entire neighborhood could hear her. The twins ran up to her with huge smiles on their faces. I had a low battery alert. They only saw their grandmother a couple of times a year, and they were stunned to see her in their driveway with no prior warning. Their grandmother hugged both of them so tight they thought they'd pop. "Look at you two," she said. "You both look like you've grown a foot since the last time I saw you." Their grandmother was a petite woman with long graying brown hair that was pulled back in a tight braid. She had the warmest smile and the kindest eyes in the world, which wrinkled pleasantly when she smiled, just like the twins' dad's eyes had. She was cheerful and energetic, and exactly what the twins needed. She always wore bright dresses with her signature shoes with white laces and brown heels. She was never more than a few feet away from her large green travel bag and blue purse. And although their grandfather had died many, many years before, she always wore her wedding ring. "We had no idea you were coming," Connor said. "It wouldn't be a surprise if you knew I was coming," Grandma said. "What are you doing here, Grandma?" Alex asked. "Your mom called and asked me to come stay with you while she went to work," Grandma told them. "I couldn't let you spend your birthday alone, could I? And thank goodness I was in the country." Their grandmother was retired and spent most of her year traveling around the world with her other retired friends. They traveled to mostly third world countries to read to sick children in hospitals and taught other children and communities to read and write. That's really sweet, isn't it? Do you think Grandma's a good person? She sounds like it to me. "Come help me with the groceries," Grandma told the twins. She opened her trunk and the twins began unloading bags and bags filled with food into the house. It was enough food to last them for weeks. Mrs. Bailey was sitting at the kitchen table going through another stack of mail with bright red warning labels on them. She quickly pushed them to the side when the twins and their grandmother paraded into the kitchen with groceries. "What's all this?" Miss Bailey asked. "Hello, dear," Grandmother said to her. "I'm planning on cooking the twins a huge birthday dinner, and I wasn't sure what you had in the house. So I went to the store and picked up a couple of things." Their grandmother always had a talent of sugarcoating the truth. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head, unprepared for the kind gesture. "It wasn't any trouble at all," Grandma said with a small but reassuring smile. "Alex, Connor, how about you go get your birthday presents from the front seat of my car, and I'll catch up with your mom for a second. But don't open them until tonight." They happily did as she asked. Presents was a word that had been absent from the vocabulary for a long time. "See, I told you," Alex said to Connor on their way to their grandmother's car. "Optimism always pays off." Optimism. What does that mean? It means when you're happy, right? Having good thoughts. Yeah, Connor said. Half a dozen wrapped presents with bright bows, each marked one of them, were waiting on the front seat of the car. The twins returned inside with their gifts. Their grandmother and mother were still having a conversation that they most likely were not supposed to hear. "Things are still tough," Miss Bailey said, "even after selling the bookstore and the house foreclosed, and we still have some debt and things unpaid from the funeral, but we're making it somehow. In a few more months, we'll be back on our feet." Grandmother took Miss Bailey's hand in her own. "If you need anything, dear, and I mean anything, you know where to find me," she said. "You've already helped so much," Miss Bailey told her. "I don't know where we'd be now if it weren't for you. I could never ask for anything else." You're not asking, I am offering," Grandmother assured. The twins knew if they eavesdropped any longer they'd be caught, so they walked back into the kitchen with their presents. "Well, I have to go back to work," Miss Bailey said, and kissed both the twins on top of their heads. "Have a great night, you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Save some celebration for me." She gathered things and mouthed a meaningful thank you to their grandmother and was on her way. Grandma put her things away in the guest bedroom and returned to the kitchen, where she found a stack of bills Miss Bailey had put aside. She plopped the mail into her own purse with a smile. And that was that. Grandma loved helping people, especially if it was against their will. "Let's get started on dinner, shall we?" Grandma said, clapping her hands. Connor and Alex sat at the table and visited with their grandmother while she cooked up a storm. She told them about all of her recent trips to the difficulties she and her friends experienced getting in and out of places, and all the interesting people she met along the way. "I've never met a person I didn't learn something from," Grandma said. Even the most monotonous person will surprise you. Remember that. Monotonous. Remember, unimono means one. So monotonous, kind of like one tone, like one speed. Very boring, monotonous. Same thing over and over again. She was cooking so many different things that it was impossible to tell which ingredient was going where. Everything she did was so fast, and she used almost every pan and dish they had. With every second that passed, the twins' stomachs growled louder and louder, and their mouths salivated more and more. Finally, after a few hours of aroma-teasing torture, they ate. Alex and Connor had become so accustomed to frozen dinners and takeout, they had forgotten how good food could taste. There were plates of mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese, and oven-roasted chicken with carrots and peas, and freshly baked rolls. Their kitchen table looked like a cover of a cookbook. Just when they thought they couldn't possibly eat anymore, their grandmother pulled a huge birthday cake out of the oven. The twins were amazed. They hadn't even realized that she'd been baking one. She sang happy birthday, and the twins blew out the candles. Now open your presents, Grandma said. I've been collecting for you all year. They opened their boxes and were flooded with knickknacks from countries that their grandmother had visited. Alex was given copies of her favorite books in other languages. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in French, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in German, and Little Women in Dutch. Connor got a pile of candies and tacky shirts that said things like, "My crazy grandmother traveled to India," and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. That sounds like Connor's sense of humor, doesn't it? She seems to know the grandkids pretty well. They both received several figurines of famous structures like the Eiffel Tower and the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Taj Mahal. If you don't know those places, that would be fun to research while we're at home, wouldn't it? Look at pictures of the Eiffel Tower, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Taj Mahal. I think you should look into that when we're done here. That's interesting. It's crazy to think that places like this actually exist in the world, Alex said, holding the Eiffel Tower in her hand. You would be amazed to know what's out there just waiting to be discovered, their grandmother said with a smile and a twinkle in her eyes. Got about 4 more pages in the chapter, okay? A day with very lousy expectations had turned into one of the best birthdays they'd ever had. As the night grew later and the visit with their grandmother had to come to a bittersweet end, since their dad had died, they never saw their grandmother for more than a day at a time, and there were always a few months between each visit. She was always so busy with her travels. "When do you leave?" Alex asked her grandmother. "Tomorrow," she said, "as soon as I take you to school." Twins' posture sank a bit. "What's the matter?" asked their grandmother, sensing their spirits sink. "We just wish you could stay longer, Grandma, that's all," Connor said. "We really miss you when you're gone," Alex added. "Things are so gloomy here without Dad, but you make everything seem like it's going to be okay." Their grandmother's constant smile faded slightly, and her gaze drifted off toward the window. She stared blankly into the night, and she took a deep breath. "Oh, kiddos, if I could spend every day with you, I would," Grandma said longingly, perhaps more disheartened than she intended to show. But sometimes life hands us responsibilities, not because we want them, but because we were meant to have them. And it's our duty to see to them. And all I can think about is how much I miss you two and your dad when I'm away. It was hard for Alex and Connor to understand. Did she not want to travel as much as she did? Their grandmother looked back at them. Her eyes were bright with a new idea. "I almost forgot. I have one more gift for you." Grandma said and jumped and skipped into the next room. She returned carrying a large, old book with a dark emerald cover. It was titled The Land of Stories, in gold writing. Alex and Connor knew what the book was as soon as they saw it. If their childhood could be symbolized by an object, it was this book. "That's your old storybook," Alex proclaimed. "I haven't seen it in years." Their grandmother nodded. "It's a very old book and has been with our family for a long time," Grandma told them. "I take it with me everywhere I go, and I read it to children in other countries. But now, I want you two to have it." The twins were shocked by the gesture. "What?" Connor asked. "We can't take your book, Grandma. That's the Land of Stories. It's your book. It's always been so important to you." Their grandmother opened the book and flipped through the pages. the entire room filled with its musty paper aroma. "That's very true," said Grandma. "The book and I have spent a lot of time together over the years, but the best times were when I read to you. So, I'd like to pass it down. To you now. I don't need it anymore. I have all the stories memorized anyway." She handed it to them. Alex hesitated but finally accepted the book from their grandmother. It didn't feel right to take it. It was like receiving an heirloom from a relative who was still alive. Whenever you're feeling down, on the days you miss your dad the most, or when you just wish I was here, all you have to do is open it up, and we'll all be together in spirit, reading along, Grandma told them. "Now, it's getting late, and you have school tomorrow. Let's get ready for bed." They did as she asked. Even though they were too old for it, their grandmother insisted on tucking them into their beds like old times. Alex took the Lena stories with her to bed that night. She gently flipped through the old pages, being careful not to tear them. Seeing all the colorful illustrations of the places and characters again made her feel like she was reading an old scrapbook of sorts. She loved spending time reading about fairy tale characters more than anything. They had always felt so real and accessible to her. They were the best friends she had ever had. "I wish we got to choose the world we lived in," Alex said, running her fingers over the illustrations. They were so inviting. In her hand was a world unlike the one she lived in. It was a world unaltered by political corruption or technology, a world where good things came to good people, and a world she wanted to be a part of with all her being. Alex imagined what it would be like to be a character in her own fairy tale. The forest she'd run through, the castle she'd live in, the creatures she'd befriend. Eventually, Alex's eyelids began to feel heavy, and she closed the Land of Stories, placed it on her nightstand, and clicked off the lamp, and began to drift off to sleep. She was just about to fade into unconsciousness when she heard a funny noise. A low humming sound filled her room. "What in the world?" Alex said to herself. Ooh, we got 10% left on the battery. "What in the world?" Alex said to herself, and opened her eyes to see what it was. She saw nothing. "That's strange," she said. She closed her eyes once more and began to drift back to sleep. The humming noise began to buzz through the room again. Alex sat up and looked around the room and finally found what was making the noise. It was coming from inside the Land of Stories on her nightstand. And to her amazement, the pages were unmistakably glowing. That's the end of the chapter. So next time we read will be chapter 4, The Land of Stories. Miss you guys. Can't wait to read again. Love you. Bye.